Dobar dan svima u ovom malom krugu, zanimljivom. Poštovani prorektore, poštovani pročelniče, drage kolegice i kolege, poštovani prijatelji Hrvatskog katoličkog sveučilišta, sve vas srdačno pozdravljam ovdje u dvorani Blaženog Alojzija kardinala Stepinca. Kao što smo već prošli put rekli, za ovu akademsku godinu odlučili smo imati niz predavanja veleposlanika imenovanih u Republici Hrvatskoj. Današnje predavanje je drugo po redu, održat će ga njegova ekscelencija gospodin Ruaidhri Dowling, veleposlanik Irske u Republici Hrvatskoj. Your Excellency, we are pleased to have you accepted our invitation and you are very welcome on our university. Naš današnji gost, njegova ekscelencija, gospodin Ruaidhri Dowling, veleposlanik je Irske u Republici Hrvatskoj od rujna 2020. godine. On je treći veleposlanik po redu u Irske u Republici Hrvatskoj i u Ministarstvu vanjskih poslova radio je nepunih 24 godine na raznim pozicijama i u raznim zemljama. U Australiji je obnašao dužnost pomoćnog konzula, u Grčkoj je bio zamjenik voditelja misije, u Briselu je bio zadužen za proširenje i savjetnik za Zapadni Balkan, te stalni predstavnik Irske u Europskoj uniji. Prije dolaska u Republiku Hrvatsku obnašao je dužnost voditelja Irske zajednice i odjela za kulturu Irskog veleposlanstva u Londonu. U Ministarstvu vanjskih poslova u Dublinu veleposlanik Dowling radio je kao zamjenik ravnatelja za razvojnu pomoć, jedinicu europskog dijela Rusije, politiku razoružavanja i neproliferacije, kao i za bilateralne odnose sa Sjedinjenim Američkim Državama i Kanadom. Pohađao je sveučilišni koledž u Dublinu i tehnološko sveučilište Dublin, ovdje za računalno programiranje. Oženjen je i otac jednog djeteta. U ime rektora Hrvatskog katoličkog sveučilišta, profesora dr. Željka Tanjića, cijenjeni skup pozdravit će prorektor za međunarodnu suradnju, profesor Hrvoje Štefančić. Izvolite.
Poštovani, srdačno vas pozdravljam u ime našeg rektora, profesora dr. Željka Tanjića, koji je službeno odsutan. Na Hrvatskom katoličkom sveučilištu od njegova osnutka potičemo međunarodnu suradnju s raznim katoličkim i svim drugim sveučilištima u Europi i svijetu, međunarodnim organizacijama, znanstvenim institucijama te veleposlanstvima i veleposlanicima akreditiranim u Republici Hrvatskoj. U svrhu proširivanja suradnje s veleposlanstvima u ovoj akademskoj godini 2023. i 2024. započeli smo s nizom predavanja koje će održati veleposlanici. Cilj predavanja je bolje upoznavanje i razumijevanje zemalja, kultura, visokoobrazovnih sustava te aktualnih problematika s kojima se pojedine zemlje susreću. U namjeri da što više saznamo o tijeku, načinu i učincima procesa transformacije Irske među vodeće zemlje svijeta u IT sektoru, privlačenju multinacionalnih kompanija i ulaganja u obrazovanje, koja se zbog oskudnih prirodnih resursa i slabijeg razvoja industrije odlučila pravovremeno ulagati u ljudske resurse, investiranje i izvoz, pozvali smo našeg današnjeg gosta, njegovu ekscelenciju, gospodina Ruaidhrija Marka Dowlinga, veleposlanika Irske u Hrvatskoj, koji se rado odazvao, na čemu mu zahvaljujemo. Irska je članica Europske unije od početka 1973. godine, ima više od 5 milijuna stanovnika i drugi po redu bruto domaći proizvod po glavi stanovnika. Irska je primjer poslovnog modela privlačenja mnogih ulagača i postiže zavidne ekonomske rezultate zahvaljujući dobrim liderima, a i sam proces transformacije započeo je sredinom prošlog stoljeća i nastavio se pristupom Europskoj uniji. Irska je također dobar primjer politike povratka iseljenih Iraca, jer je uspostavila dobre veze i komunikaciju s iseljeništvom, inicirala i oformila programe podrške kako bi održala te veze. Takozvani globalni Irci povezani su u dobro umreženu dijasporu koja promovira irske interese u svijetu i koja je doprinijela povećanju irskog gospodarstva. Irska vlada provela je niz aktivnosti i stvarala mreže kontakata koje su podržale i organizacije civilnog društva te doprinijele svojim radom. Značajne su inicijative i uspostava fondova unutar odjela za podršku iseljenicima koje pomažu medijima, studentima i ostalim irskim iseljenicima. Hrvatska bi mogla isto tako koristiti potencijal svojih iseljenika kao Irska. Središnji državni ured za Hrvate izvan Republike Hrvatske procjenjuje da je više od 3 milijuna raseljenih Hrvata i potomaka u svijetu, a u Irskoj oko 20.000. Trend iseljavanja nakon ulaska Hrvatske u Europsku uniju je pojačan. Ovo predavanje nas potiče na promišljanje mogućnosti primjene irskog modela u povratku iseljenika i povezanosti s dijasporom, te o ulozi i doprinosu visokoobrazovnih ustanova u tome. Članstvo Irske u Europskoj uniji donijelo je mnoge promjene, pogodnosti i napredak. O 50. obljetnici pristupa Irske u Europsku uniju, članstvu i doprinosima govorit će nam i naš današnji gost. Your Excellency, on behalf of our rector, Professor Željko Tanjić, the vice rectors, professors, and students of our academic community, we wish you a warm welcome to the Catholic University of Croatia. We appreciate your effort and your time, and we hope that your lecture, Ireland and the EU, 50 years of membership, will encourage and inspire us to do more to contribute to EU through our membership and involve ourselves in connecting and networking with the Croatian diaspora. Dobro nam došli. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. Firstly, to thank the university for giving me this opportunity and the Vice Rector for hosting me here today. I hadn't realized we were going to be filming, so normally if I was talking to a group like yourselves, I would probably be moving around a lot more, and perhaps also, you know, I wouldn't necessarily be behind a lectern at all, in fact, if I was doing it. But I will talk on the subject Ireland and the EU, but I will also talk a little bit before that about Ireland and a little bit about the history of Ireland, because that is very important when we talk about Ireland and the EU as well. So just to start with Ireland as an independent state, Ireland became an independent state in 1922. It was a revolutionary period. It was by no means a period that was, a peaceful one for Ireland. We had shortly thereafter a civil war. There was a great deal of division within the country. There was a great deal of destruction that had been done during the War of Independence and the civil war that followed. There was very little in the way of resources in Ireland. Ireland was an agrarian country. What industrial base Ireland had remained within the United Kingdom, because there was division within the country. The northeastern part of the country remained within the United Kingdom, and that has become and remains an issue for Ireland to this day. Once we had gotten our independence, Ireland was determined to take its place on the international scene and also to contribute to the international order. It was an early member of the League of Nations, joining in 1923. The League of Nations was, in a way, a precursor to United Nations. It collapsed because, while a noble endeavour, it proved to have major failings, and it failed, frankly, in its main objective, which was to avoid further wars after World War I. But Ireland was a very active member in the inter-war period. It believed that only in such an international context could a small country like Ireland actually play its part, but also to contribute to peace and security in the world. It was sadly a failure in that, because World War II saw the end of that effort. But we continued to seek to play a part. We were a founder member of the Council of Europe in 1949. We joined the United Nations in 1955. And we were very active members there, again, in much the same way as we'd seen the League of Nations. We believed that it was important that there was an international order, particularly as a small state. You know, you need to have international rules, and you must do what you can to actually support those rules and to continue to develop them. Eventually, we joined on January 1st, 1973. We joined what was at the time the European Communities, later to become the European Union, along with the UK and Denmark. And that was the first expansion of the European Communities. So we were, in that way, pioneers, and it was a case for us of a step into, I won't say the dark, but it was a step into the unknown. And I think it was also for the European Communities a step into the unknown, to try and expand beyond the original first members of it. But before going on to talking about our membership and what it meant to Ireland, I might also just mention that there's an old saying, which is that the Lord helps those who help themselves. It shouldn't be thought that in Ireland all change and all improvements happened when we joined the European Communities as was. There were already a lot of efforts being made in Ireland prior to that to change the country, to reform it, to actually bring it to a different place from where it had been. So in Ireland, that started, or one of the things that started that, was actually in education. And so there was a clear understanding that education was very important for the future, both for the people, but also to develop the economy. So we brought in free secondary education in 1967. We then went on, after we joined the European Union, to have free university education in 1996. And now Ireland has one of the highest proportions of the population with tertiary education in the OECD. I think we're third at the moment. We have about 53% of 25 to 64-year-olds who actually have tertiary education. That's in the OECD, the average is 41%. And that has had, and that did not come about by accident. It came about by a constant focus on the importance of education over many decades. These things do not happen overnight, as I'm sure many of the people here are well aware. So this was one of the things that we changed, or even before we joined the European Union, began to change. Another one was on the Irish economy. We recognised the limitations of our own resources and the need to think differently and think about how we could actually develop the economy by welcoming foreign direct investment. And so this has become a major focus of the Irish economy now, but this actual policy began in 1958. So from then onwards, we tried to promote foreign direct investment, and particularly from the United States, but also from other parts of the world, in different parts and in different decades. So this was something that, again, began before we joined the EU. But when we did join the EU, it opened Ireland to a broad range of ideas and ways of doing things differently from what we had known before. It also opened us to certain standards, which were not normal in Ireland up to that point. And an example that I often use when I'm talking about this is that in Ireland up until 1973, there was what was called the marriage ban, which was, Ireland was a poor country when we joined still. And there was an assumption that jobs in the state sector were very good jobs. And therefore, those who had them should be very thankful, of course, for them. But also that if a woman was actually employed by the state, there was an expectation that if she married, she would resign. Not an expectation, there was a requirement that she would resign. And this was one of many things in Ireland that changed once we joined the European Union. This was not acceptable to the rules of the European Union. it's not acceptable. It should never have been acceptable, but it was. And so from that time onwards, that marriage ban was removed. And one of the changes that meant was, for example, from my own Department of Foreign Affairs, that up until that time, women, if they wished to continue in a diplomatic career, actually had to remain unmarried. Otherwise, they could not continue. So from 1973 onwards, that changed. And that in turn had a tremendous effect in terms of enriching the people that we were bringing in as diplomats and ambassadors. And in a way, this is a big, it had a big impact on our makeup as a service and as more generally in the state sector, to the point now where we have 53% of all of our ambassadors are female. And that's approximately where we expect things to stay from now on, approximately at that. That has taken nearly 50 years, but it's an example of one of many, many changes that have flowed through from our joining of the EU. One of the other things that we received when we joined the European Union was we received a certain amount of funds to upgrade our infrastructure, to re-engineer parts of our economy, to support our farming sector. And when we first joined the European Union, this was hugely important. And people focused on this, really, that this was an opportunity to receive funds, to actually reform the economy, to change things around. And it was very important, particularly in the early years when we joined. But I think as time has gone on, what has become obvious to people, mostly, is that it's partially about the resources that you get, but it's also about how you choose to use them. So we chose to use a lot of our resources, again, to expand educational opportunities, to change the way our agriculture worked, to make it more economic, perhaps, than it had been, and to develop our infrastructure in terms of areas like transport. Now, none of this was adequate. Always more would be needed, but this greatly helped in the later expansion of our economy that came on. This was, as I say, a very big part of when you were talking about the EU in Ireland in the 1970s and 80s. This would have been probably the main thing that people would have been thinking about. But even in those days, this wasn't actually the case that it was the most important thing for us. What was more important to us was actually having access to what was then called the common market. Basically being able to operate and to have Irish companies active and selling what they had to offer across Europe, and also that market for ideas, that ideas coming into Ireland from all over Europe, the best examples, or trying to draw on the best examples in all parts of the economy, but also of the society. And while it wasn't realised at the time, I think this has actually had a bigger effect on modern Ireland than anything else. Obviously, there are minuses as well as pluses. When we opened to the common market, many Irish companies could not compete in that common market. So many actually closed. So it was a difficult period for many of those who were actually employed in Ireland. And that shouldn't be underestimated either. Change is never easy. And there's always a cost to that. But if you look at where Ireland is now, that could not have happened. We could not be where we are now without going through that period and without the opportunities that having access to the whole of Europe, now I'm the whole of what we now call the European Union, which is not the whole of Europe, having that access has enabled us to develop into the country that we are now. One of the other things that I think has very important to us, and that is that we could have our voice heard on an equal basis to many of the other countries that were there. Ireland is by no means the largest in population of the member states of the European Union, any more than Croatia is. But we are all at the table, and we can all talk. I think our president said this very well. You know, sometimes people talk about small member states and large member states. There are only member states, some of which have a small population and some of which have a large population. But we are all at the table. That doesn't mean that we can talk extensively on absolutely everything under the sun, but it means that if one has priorities, that you can actually focus on those priorities and have an impact on the policy. Of course, there are many other people trying to do the same, so it's a case of you have to argue your case, you have to make alliances, cooperate with other member states, but you're in that stream, you're at the table, and you get to have the opportunity to talk to the issues that matter to you and to the people that you represent. So all of these things have been very good for us. One of the other unexpected, in a way, perhaps, or less well understood things that came from our membership of the EU was that it led or helped to have that shared European framework with our colleagues from the UK, undoubtedly helped in building trust and building relationships, which then played a part in eventually in the process that led to the Good Friday Agreement, which led to peace on the island of Ireland. This is a process that continues. It's not in any way the end of the road, but it was a hugely important moment when the Good Friday Agreement came about, and it is hard to see that that would happen if we were not both members of the European Union, because what the European Union, again, to go back to the point about being able to sit at the same table, up until we both joined the European Union, the relationship between Ireland and the UK was always going to be one of a very large state with a much smaller state. And it was only when we went to the European Union, we were talking about many different subjects, many of which we actually had some commonality. There were sort of positions on which Ireland and the UK could work and work together. And I suppose we discovered that it was possible to do this, that there was a possibility to develop relationships that could then be brought back to the island of Ireland and have a positive effect there. So this is one thing, sadly, we do not have anymore, but we still have good relations with the UK, and we hope that relationships more generally with the UK and EU will, they are on I think on an even keel, a good route now, and we hope that that continues for the years to come. I think that all of this is to say that Ireland has changed and evolved hugely over the course of our 50 years. That wasn't an endless progression upwards. We have had setbacks. We have had issues where we don't always agree with other members of the EU, but we have a mechanism where we can actually talk things through. And we have an ability to actually have our voice heard, which is hugely important. I mean, obviously, one of the other things that we have sought to do in our membership of the EU, as we recognize the value of joining for us, is that we also recognize the value of joining for others. And we were delighted that 10 years ago, Croatia joined right at the end of our last presidency of the the EU, which was a wonderful moment for it to have. And also, we were delighted that this year, Croatia has joined the Euro. Now, it's also joined the Schengen, but we haven't joined Schengen, so we're not members of Schengen. So I will congratulate Croatia on joining, but we are not members ourselves, whereas the Euro we absolutely are. and we were delighted to welcome Croatia in to that. I mean, these were, one of the things that this means for us is that, we now are around the table with Croatia, and we have the opportunity to engage with them on lots of issues that are of concern. Many of the issues that we talk about within the EU, Ireland and Croatia would have similar positions because we have many similarities. Our histories are both different, but also there are points on which there are similarities between us. And we, of course, share the fact that we are, smaller population member states. We are, in a way, us to the west and Croatia to the southeast. We are considered to be on the peripheries, in a way, of the EU. And so we share many, many concerns. One of the other things we share is a great focus on human rights and the rule of law, democratization, the importance of these things, both within the EU and also more broadly in the world. And so this is another area that we can work with and do work with Croatia, not just within the EU, but also in a UN context and the Council of Europe, particularly. So I think I will probably leave it there in terms of the where we are now in Ireland. We have changed significantly. I was talking to the Vice Rector. One of the changes is that Ireland, when I was growing up, had a population of about 3.5 million. Now Ireland has a population of about nearly 5.2 million. That population is quite different from what it was. We have a lot of new Irish communities, one of which is actually Croatian. So we have a Croatian community, probably around 18 to 20,000 or thereabouts, who are making a very significant contribution to Ireland, but also making a contribution back here in Croatia. And again, I was talking to the Vice Rector about, last week I was at a business conference and I met a couple of young Croatian men who had been to Ireland, had worked there, had learned particular skills, had set up a company and had brought that company back to Croatia and are now doing very well, not just in the Croatian market, but again, as Croatia is a member of the European Union, they have projects across Europe for their company. So they're actually doing work in Britain and Ireland, they're doing work in Germany, they're doing work, wherever there is work to be had, they're working on that. So that's one of the things that is great to see, where people are combining their times. This is also, I'm well aware, an issue on which Ireland and Croatia, again, sadly, have a shared history of emigration. And it's something that is a difficult one for Ireland, as it is for Croatia. So although our population is now increasing, there is still significant numbers of Irish leaving the country every year. And as with Croatia, this is always a case for some sadness, for particularly the families and also for the country in a way, that we lose some people. Some of them come back, some do not. But those who do not then become the best ambassadors for Ireland that we can have. And they have had a huge impact on the development of Ireland, and particularly the development of our economy in recent years, because many of them have gone on to do very well when they went abroad, and they can open doors for Ireland. They can't do more than open doors. So you still have to have the case, you have to make the argument to do business in Ireland, as you would have to make the argument to do business in Croatia. If it doesn't make sense for businesses are not charities. So if it doesn't make sense for the businesses, they will not do business there. However, having people who understand the country and who have, one hopes, a liking for the country, and even if people are not all that happy about a country when they leave, and sometimes they're not, because a lot of people don't want to leave. They have to leave. They have to go for various economic reasons. There is a sense in which you can you know, a person can leave the country, but in a way the country never leaves the person. So, you know, you can take Croatians out of Croatia, but they remain Croatians inside, in their hearts. And so this is something that, you know, again, Vice Rector was talking about diaspora. It's something that Ireland has invested a great deal of time and effort in to try and connect with our communities overseas, some of which are historic, but not as historic as the Croatian community, as I have to say. You have much older communities than we do. But some of ours, particularly in the United States, would go back 150 years, Australia, probably even more. But, you know, a lot of them would be people who've left Ireland much more recently than that. And to connect to those people and to try and understand where they're coming from and to validate their experience is very important, because, you know, they can be of great assistance to the country, but of course, they have to see how the country appreciates what they are able to do and how it can contribute to them as well, so that it's a two-way process. And this is something that, again, Ireland does, and I know that Croatia does as well, and it's going to be ever more increasingly important, because so much of what happens in the world, it's down to the context that you have, people to people, and what engagement you have with different countries. A huge amount can be done by simply personal contact. So I can talk a little bit about where Ireland is now. I think you know, life expectancy is a decade longer than it was in 1973. Our economy has transformed from agrarian to advanced, and you could argue our citizens' rights have been strengthened by EU frameworks. So one of the things that the EU does, or tries to do, is to promote rights across Europe, that as a member of a European country, that you do have rights and that these can be enforced wherever you happen to go. This is not perfect by any means, and it's something that is constantly being worked on and will constantly be worked on. But I think it's something that Ireland has benefited from and will continue to benefit from, and we see as being a very valuable element within what the EU brings. And you know, one of the things that is just, you know, we live in a very difficult world in many ways. But I suppose one thing that those who came before us would say is the world has always been a difficult place. And what the EU can do and does is by working together, we can have more of an influence on that world than if we seek to work on our own. Basically, as the world changes and as other parts of the world develop, Europe is an important voice, but it is one where even the largest European countries would be considered medium-sized by world standards. And so it's something where in order to continue to have relevance and continue to have influence in the world, we need to work together. So solidarity at a European level is very important, and very important for Ireland, but very important actually even for the largest of the EU member states. So even the largest can't go on their own. And we are dealing with so many different emergencies. We have climate crisis, we have war on our continent, there's terrible violence in the Middle East, we have pressured borders, economically there's terrible inflation, and that all sounds like a huge amount to deal with, and it is. But we can deal with it better together than we can apart. And we have managed to deal with a lot in the last few years. I mean, particularly if you look at things like COVID, the initial reactions were chaotic, but they improved. And our eventual sort of response was much more united than it began. And the same is true for other issues that we are addressing now. I think I might leave it there. And there's a lot more that one could say, and I could say, about Ireland's development, and also, you know, a little bit more about the world as it is now. But I think I will leave it there. I hope I have proven, or I've shown, how Ireland has changed, but also how Ireland wanted to change. In a sense, we always looked to the international. We always wanted to look at working with others internationally, and we always have been open to new ideas and the sense of trying to learn from other parts, other countries, on how they actually have done things, how they have addressed issues, and we continue to do this. So I have been involved, for example, in where we have ministerial visits here to Croatia, Irish ministers coming to Croatia to try and learn from Croatia's experience. And I know that the same has been true in Croatians going to Ireland to try and learn from our experience. There's always someone to learn from, and you have to be open to doing that, because nobody has all the answers, and nobody has a perfect situation or system. Everything is constantly in need of improvement. Ireland is the same, very much. We're facing significant challenges domestically, and we desperately look for answers to the challenges that we face. And even where we think that we have quite a good system in place for something, we feel that it can probably still be improved. So always look for, always be ready to learn. And I think that's maybe a good point at which to stop at a university, because if anybody knows of the importance of learning, it would be people here who spend their lives teaching and also learning about the world. So thank you. Now, I'm actually very open to taking any questions, if anybody has any questions to ask. Yep.
Thank you for your lecture. I must say I'm a huge rugby fan and still very disappointed for your loss in the quarterfinals.
This is true. This is true.
But as someone who has the EU membership, and you said EU background, and you said that Ireland is sitting at the table on an equal base and playing its active role. So I believe that you're familiar with this new Franco-German proposition for institutional reform.
Yes, absolutely.
And how they frame it to address the institutional challenges, to improve functionality, and etc. So how do you, in Ireland, how do you see this proposition maybe to decreasing the size of commissioner college, even to introduce second-order commissioners, first-order commissioners, even introduce this qualified majority voting in the council, replacing unanimity? It will definitely abolish these mechanisms of political equality between the member states that really benefited, let's say, medium-sized or small-sized countries, because it was the basis of the European Union. Everyone to have this equal part in decision making. Okay,
well, I mean, I suppose we're going through a period of reflection at the moment, and this is something that the EU does frankly, every decade or two, and at least this one is engendered by a renewed focus on enlargement and the idea of new member states joining in the next few years. Exactly when, hard to say, and that relates in large part to what has been happening in Ukraine, the terrible Russian invasion of the country, and that has injected new life into the enlargement process. Ireland is, by and large, and in principle, always has been pro-enlargement, for exactly the reasons I mentioned earlier, which is that we believe that enlargement was hugely beneficial to us and that it will be hugely beneficial to other countries who come in. as long as they meet the criteria to do so. And that's a very important qualifier, that they need to be ready to join. But the actual paper I think you're talking about, which is the Franco-German paper, was a paper put together by experts. And it is intended to be sort of an input into that process of reflection. But that's what it is. It's an input into the process. It isn't actually an agenda. It isn't a framework. It is one amongst many. There are many other ideas out there. I think where we would see this is that, you know, it is true that there is a need to consider how the EU works in a context where we would hope to have more member states. So how do you actually make the EU continue to work? Sometimes it sort of grinds awfully slow even at the moment, but are there ways that we can actually improve on that? I think this process has only just begun, and I think that there will be a huge amount of engagement amongst different governments, the European Parliament, national parliaments, and probably also, I'm sure that people will also have their views. So this is not going to be something that is a particularly quick process. But we think that, you know, we need to engage to discuss. We would have, I think, you know, there would be things that we would not be all that enthusiastic about. But I think that that would be true even of the largest member states. France, Germany would also have things that they would not be too keen on. And I know that even what was proposed by that Franco-German expert paper, I mean, I think they have been at pains to make the point that this isn't their government position, and that actually there would be a lot of things in there that they would not agree with. And of course, the other thing is that even Franco-German, they don't have a common position. So they have their own interests. So there are a lot of interests going on here. And where we're going to end up with this, it's going to be interesting to see. One of the things that is being examined closely is that the last time that we opened the EU treaties, there were various different, the EU treaties at this point, I used to have a book, and it was this thick of all the EU treaties and all the texts of all the EU treaties, and I'm sure it's now this thick. There is a great deal that was put in there in years gone by, which in a way hasn't yet been fully tried or hasn't yet been fully brought into effect. So there are possibilities to actually streamline some work which we haven't even really explored fully. So what I think that would be an important place to start, to see what is already allowed for under the treaties and what is possible under the treaties, and to see how that can actually improve. Because this is all supposed to be about making the EU work better in a situation where you'd have many more people around the table than you have at the moment. So that's not really a simple answer, I know, but it's not a simple question. But I think you have to have the conversation. You can't just say no, that, no, we don't agree, full stop. Because, until you actually understand where other people are coming from and they understand where you're coming from, that's how you begin to get to the point of working out what is possible and what isn't possible. So until you do that, and I think at this point we're very early in this process, really, very early in this process. And there's a lot more to be explored, and there's a lot more, I suspect, from all of the different countries and the European Parliament to have views on the different aspects that you're talking about. So I think this will be food for conversation for, frankly, years to come. So, which is, of course, part of the way that the EU always does things. We talk things almost to death, and eventually we come up with something that everybody can live with. So, any other questions? Yes?
Could you tell us something about the relation between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, and what has happened after the Brexit?
Well, I mean, as I said in my discussion earlier, there's a Good Friday Agreement. The Good Friday Agreement brought an end to the violence in Northern Ireland, and that was predicated to some extent on the fact that both Ireland and the UK were members of the EU. This meant that you had very little in the way of friction. The border almost ceased to exist, and that meant that goods, services, and people could just flow back and forth, and many did. I mean, so the border itself was never intended to be a political border. It was a county border. So in some places it goes right down the middle of a street, you know, so it was never a practical border in that sense. So Brexit obviously, you know, made things more difficult for certain areas, not for people. So people transferring across from one part to the other was still possible because there is a common travel area, and still there is a common travel area between the UK and Ireland. But in terms of goods, there were issues with that. And so there was a protocol to the withdrawal agreement, which tried to deal with those issues. Now, that didn't prove to be very easy. It caused a lot of friction. It continued to cause you friction for years, and was a subject of discussion between the European Commission and the UK, because, of course, this is a matter for the EU. It isn't a matter for Ireland and the UK. We have our bilateral relationship, but this was a matter for the EU. And eventually, after discussions, there was a way forward found, and the Windsor, framework was agreed, and this seems to be working reasonably well. I think, to be honest, this whole thing will be an iterative process. There will be tweaks to try and improve on how things work, but the underlying agreement remains and will remain, because it is intended to address a situation where the United Kingdom is not a member of the common market anymore. So inevitably, that has an effect. One wants to minimize the difficulties that causes, but that's a fact, and that's something that, you know, that this needs to reflect, and it does reflect. But one of the effects of that agreement is, I think, it has had a very positive effect on the more general UK-EU relationship, that it's now been possible to find agreement on, for example, Horizon, UK membership of Horizon, and hopefully in the future in other areas. But this is something entirely will really depend on the UK and also on the EU, and what is possible and what isn't possible. But at least the atmosphere is significantly better. Now, in terms of Northern Ireland itself, there is, of course, an issue there that there's an assembly. The assembly has not been in effect for quite a while now. The hope was that once there was agreement on this issue of how the goods handling would be addressed, that this would then lead to the assembly being restored. That hasn't yet happened, which is obviously a problem. Obviously, the Irish government has strongly urged that it should happen. While it doesn't, it causes difficulties because there is no government, direct government in Northern Ireland. There is only the Northern Ireland Secretary, and it limits what can be done for Northern Ireland in terms of policy and new policies, because you don't have ministers for all of the different ministries. And economically, this has been a difficult time, and it would be very good to have ministers there to address the current situation and try and come up with new policies that will help Northern Ireland to develop and to continue to develop. So one of the things that should be possible with the arrangements, and this was always the expectation with the protocol, was that Northern Ireland has a sort of a unique selling point in a way, which is that you can operate and you can sell into the British market, you can sell also into the European Union market. And so in that sense, that's a great advantage that potentially that Northern Ireland has and should help to attract, for example, foreign direct investment into Northern Ireland. But you know, so this is something. It's something that we hope and continue to hope that the Assembly will be restored, and that the government in Northern Ireland will actually be restored as well, and that there will be the First Minister and Deputy First Minister will be appointed. But you know, this is something that is being strongly encouraged, but it's not something that can be sort of forced by anybody other than the parties concerned.
We have always similar situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina, very similar society like Northern Ireland, so we understand.
Yes, so it is what it is in that sense. I mean, obviously, one of the other things with the Good Friday Agreement that sometimes comes up is that you know, at some point, if there is a majority likely to be for unity, there will be a referendum for that. But that seems to be honest, some way off as of now. So, but it's certainly allowed for within the Good Friday Agreement at some point. So, any other? Yes?
I presume that after the accession to EU, Irish accession to EU, the structure of Irish foreign trade changed in terms of scope and the spectrum of trading partners. Because
very much so, yes, of course.
Because if I understood well, there was a strong connection with UK before that.
Absolutely.
And so what was the time scale of this change? How fast did Ireland succeeded in building a different trading network?
Honestly, not that fast. I mean, it was a slow business. It took, you know, considerable amount of time because the Irish, for example, agriculture, you could argue, remains quite focused on the British market, much less so than it was, but still it's a very important market for Ireland. And more generally, the British market remained very important in an Irish context, but in declining, as you say. And that remains the case to this day. So it's been a slow process because the British market was good for many Irish companies. And, you know, it was right beside us. And it's a lot easier to trade with people who you're right beside than to trade with people who are across the world from you. You know, so this is something that, it has been pointed out to our neighbours as well, that it's easier to trade with the people you're close to than people you're a long way away from. But what has happened is that, you know, we expanded quite significantly our trading relationships with other EU countries. Belgium, for example, Germany, France, Italy, you know, all of these were significantly enhanced. So I think that our general trade volumes went up hugely. It's not necessarily that the trade volumes to Britain went down. It was more that we just had a lot more volumes going to other parts of Europe and later to the rest of the world. Although this is something that we feel we still need to do more work on. So one of the things that we did as a result of Brexit was to try and see how we could expand our presence in the world and expand our trading relationships with the world as well. Almost as a reaction, not entirely, but partially to you know, the changing world that we found ourselves in. And Global Ireland was the name of the policy that we had for that, and it saw us opening up a number of new embassies, but also a number of new trading offices. and trying to promote Ireland in places that we would not have previously been seen or have a presence in, particularly South America, but also in parts of Asia and even in parts of Africa. And so this is something that it's ongoing. It will be ongoing. One of the changes that also has happened more since Brexit is that the links, the trading links and the actual links for goods, imports and exports into Ireland, a lot of these used to come through Britain. And now, and very quickly, a lot of those links, a lot of new ways to get directly from Ireland to other parts of Europe went into effect within a matter of a few months of Brexit and being finalised. You know, so now you have the ability, if you wish, you can still go through Britain. There are some slownesses there sometimes, or you can go directly. So there are lots of new sea routes. We were already pretty well connected from air routes because we've always had a lot of connections in that respect. But that is one of the changes that's happened as a result of Brexit, that you now can do a lot more direct connections between Ireland and different parts of particularly France, but also in other parts as well. So that's a rather long answer. So initially the sort of changeover was a slow, gradual, but constant one. More that our trading relationships with other parts of the world expanded rather than necessarily that the trading relationships with Britain fell. I mean, they're still a substantial and significant trading partner for us, and they, to be honest, they always, I hope, will be, because they're our closest neighbours, and so there's a perfect sense to us having a very significant trading relationship with them. But that has, I mean, Brexit particularly has meant that certain parts of the Irish economy are going to have to reorganise themselves, because they may have had a big focus on the British market. They need to now expand into other markets so that they are not overly dependent on one market. So, and that is a process that's happening now, that you know, we're expanding into other parts of the world. So, any other questions? No? Okay. Thank you very much.
Evo, zahvaljujemo veleposlaniku na njegovom predavanju, publici na zanimljivim pitanjima i odgovorima koje smo dobili. Naš sljedeći susret trebao bi se dogoditi 13. prosinca u dopodnevnim satima. Pozivam vas da se odazovete. Gosta vam još nećemo otkrivati, ali uskoro ćete dobiti pozivnicu za to događanje. Evo, srdačan pozdrav svima i do novog susreta na HKS-u.